To start, I'm just using a pencil to sketch out the lighthouse as well as some of the background details. This is meant to really just be a fun tutorial, nothing too serious, great for beginners and intermediate who are wanting to sharpen some skills. I did actually prime the background with a acrylic bright neon orange. And if you don't do this currently, it's a great way to tie the painting together in the end. Once you have your sketch in, you're going to start by blocking in colors. And what I'm doing is just using my darkest color at the top and working my way down. My favorite sky color to use is actually blue-gray, and that's just a shade from most oil paints. You can mix whatever colors you like. You can do a bright blue, a dark blue, but I just feel like this blue-gray color really gives a look of the coastal skies that we have here. So my lighthouse is actually a reference photo from Tybee Island, which is not too far from here, and me and my family visit all the time. It's kind of a staple, iconic lighthouse in the area. So I thought it'd be fun to paint it. Now, it's important to gradient your skies. So as I'm working down, I am lightening the color. So I'm just adding a bit of white. And as I get closer to the horizon, I'm actually adding a bit of purple and a little bit of orange. If you are going to add yellow, it's best to wait till it dries, or your color could turn green. Once you're done with that, you just use a soft feather blending brush to blend out all the brush strokes. Next, we're going to move on to the clouds. I love painting clouds. I like putting in all the fluffy details, and I feel like you can just kind of get carried away with them. So I'll show you a couple different techniques for this. You don't want to start with stark white. That should be the very last color that you do, and you will have to put the bright white on when you're finished. You can put it on with a paintbrush like I was before and just blend in the edges going around where you left it white. Or my favorite way, you can use a palette knife to put a chunk of color kind of in the top corners and then use a filbert brush to blend it in. Clouds can be pretty scary to learn how to paint. There's really no perfect way to create them. You really just have to get comfortable and find your own way. I had a teacher that told me once that the best way to learn how to paint clouds is to paint them. You can see that I'm barely touching the canvas, and I'm going to work my way up. I'm also adding just a hint of orange in there as well, where the sun might hit the clouds. Less is more, so when you feel like you've got a good shape, step back from it for a minute or revisit it a little bit later. Clouds do have shadows, so you do want to use a little bit of a really, really light gray. I like to mix a little purple into it and use that for the shadows on your clouds. At the horizon, you'll find that your clouds are more straight on and much, much smaller, and usually in an orange-red color. This is actually orange, purple, and a little bit of white mixed together. So I'm just using the tip of the brush. You can use a smaller brush. I also used a very light, modest gradient color in the background. Feel free to make this hot pinks and reds like we see on the beach. Once again, I'm going to use my blending brush to go back in and just soften up the edges. Now I'm going to go to work on my lighthouse. This lighthouse is actually black and white. And so I am going to start at the top, but you can start wherever you're comfortable. This is a beginner's tutorial. So if you are someone who likes symmetry and perfect lines, I strongly recommend that you use a ruler or painter's tape once your painting is completely dry to put in these fine line details. It takes a little bit longer, but it will make it pop. When you are painting blacks or whites, you want to make sure to use gradient effects of those colors as you're underpainting. So I am actually not using straight black here. I have mixed it into 3 different shades of black, using my lightest shades on the sides and my darkest in the middle to create a 3D effect. This lighthouse is black and white, but you can make your lighthouse whatever color you would like. Again, I'm using a lighter gray on the sides and then the dark blacks on the middle to make it pop. Now I'm going back in with that same brush and using that lighter gray to make the shiplap that is on all sides of this lighthouse. Now for the middle, I am actually going to use a white color that has a little bit of that gray blue mixed in with it so that when I highlight it with white, it'll really stand out. Take your time on these details. Again, using a ruler or some painter's tape would make a big difference on how your edges look. Now I'm going to go back in and again add that shiplap on each side. It's important on the sides to not go straight across, but to actually angle away so that it gives it that 3D effect. When you are using white paints, it is very important to actually wait for the painting to dry so that you can go ahead and get those stark white contrasts where you need them. Next, I'm going to be adding in windows. There are 2 windows. The trick with windows is to really put them in subtly and keep the top part very defined with a dark gray. Bring that dark gray down, and then on the very bottom half, you're actually just going to touch it with white. So again, if I would have went in with a true black on the bottom instead of adding the different shades of gray, you wouldn't be able to see this window. So again, a small rectangle, black box, and on the very bottom, you're going to add just a touch of white. All right, for the top part. Now this is where there's a lot of detail. So you need a really fine liner brush. You can also use paint markers if that's more comfortable. Or again, get some rulers, get some tape, and tape this section off once you've finished painting in the sky. Using different shades of gray and black, you'll be able to create some definition. And you can see, even though I am an experienced painter, I have very shaky hands. And so for this, again, it's meant to just be fun. It will sharpen your skills the more you practice. Now that I'm adding a true black over the top gray details, it's really making that top part stand out. For these top details, it is much better to wait until the paint dries. I'm doing this on a wet canvas, and you'll see that I actually stop this tutorial and start over the next day when I've allowed it to dry a little bit. For the light in your lighthouse, you're going to start with an orange in the middle. And then you're going to work some of that gray around the top back, a light gray, just to show the inside top from the angle that we're at. Once this is dry, then you will go in with a bright yellow in the center to just give it that final pop of that bright light that's in the tower. Once you've filled in all the details around the top part of your lighthouse, you'll let this dry overnight. If you're using oil paints, there are liquid mediums that you can add to your paint so that it will dry overnight. Liquid Original is what I use. It actually, if you do like a 50 to 50% ratio, it will dry overnight. If you're using acrylic, you can actually start to work on your piece in just a couple of hours. Once you've filled in all the squares with colors, let this dry, and then you can go back in and add your window detail back in. The very last thing that you will do is add a touch of bright yellow right in the center. All right, so now we're going to move on to the bottom. I'm going to do an ocean sunset on the left side of my painting, and on the right side I'm going to do a sand dune. This is not part of the reference photo, this is just something that I'm adding in. And so feel free to add in whatever you would like. You can keep it simple and just do the ocean all the way across the back. For that I just used a dark blue with a little bit of black mixed in. If you want to do the sand dunes, you can use a couple of different colors of brown, gray, and white. You want to create shadows with that. Putting your lightest colors on top. Sand is very choppy, so I'm using a smaller brush here that's a little more stiff so that it actually keeps the brush strokes. So that it gives it a realistic sand look. Sand is actually pretty easy to paint when you put the different colors on. Now again, I'm using oil paint, so the colors kind of meld together and you can move them around, which is really nice. If you're using acrylic, it's a little bit harder. There are different things that you can mix in to make it dry slower like oil paint. All right, the sand dunes, I'm going to add some tall grasses to. Again, you can leave this part out completely, or if you are a more advanced painter, you can add something even more elaborate. I love when I teach my paint and sip classes because I never know what someone's going to add. Most people stick to what I'm teaching them exactly, but others, that have painted several times will add in anything that they know how to paint, a bird or, something of that nature. So here I'm just cleaning up my edges around my lighthouse. I did do this full painting in one setting, so none of my paint is dry. It was not meant to be perfect. It was really just meant to be fun. Now I'm going to add my sun on the left side, just using a small brush. I'm using a bright orange. I am going to take my orange and a little bit of yellow mixed and kind of dust it into the background of the lighthouse. I'm doing this so that you get that backlit glow. So this is the next day where I've come back to the painting where it's dry, and I'm going to straighten up some of my edges. I am going in with a true black and just adding in some more fine details. Again, I'm an experienced painter, but my hands are very shaky. I would normally probably lay this down on a table so that I could access it a little bit easier and get my lines a little bit straighter. The next thing that you would want to do is go back in and outline the blacks and whites on your lighthouse so that it really comes to the foreground of your painting. The studio light I'm using for this tutorial did wash out the colors at the end here, so they're not true to the final product. I will share some photos and images of the final painting in better lighting at the end and at the beginning, so feel free to take a screenshot and use that as a reference photo for picking out your colors. I am going to go in over the white area on the lighthouse and actually add just a touch of gray so that I can really make the edges pop and add back in that shiplap detail. Again, this image is a little bit washed out from what the final product will look like. Last but not least, I did add a little bit of yellow to the left side of the lighthouse, and I added it through the white portion. I did also go back in and add a little bit of some more shadows to my clouds to just give them a three-dimensional look. I'm using a light gray with a little bit of orange mixed in. I did the same thing on the clouds that are lower to the horizon. For this, I used a dark orange. The trick with adding the shadows is to not have very much paint on your brush at all. And so whatever color I'm going to use, I actually will dip my brush in it and then I will wipe it off with a dry paper towel before adding it to the canvas so that I can really control the amount of color that I add. Clouds are translucent, even though they may have dark shades and light shades, and so less is more. Again, if you're not liking how your clouds are turning out, stop for a while. I actually like to take a photo of them or video of them on my phone of the canvas, and then I'll look at it later, or I'll prop it up somewhere in my room. I like to put them on my mantle in my living room, and I'll just stare at it for a couple of days, and it helps me figure out what I need to add. Now that I've added some shadows in, I'm going back in with my bright white to add in some details. Now again, I am using bright white on dry. This painting is dry on the underneath. And you want to focus on the top side of the clouds or the top side of the shadow to add the white. You can see that my brush has had better days, but these are the best brushes for getting in these final little details. So if you have a brush that has been through a lot, save it for details like this or for grass. Anything that maybe doesn't need a straight edge. On the bottom left side of this painting, I am going to add some yellow into the clouds because this is the side that the sun is setting on the horizon over the ocean, just to give it that little last blast of color. I started to add some rocks here, but I actually ended up taking them back out. Again, you can add whatever you'd like to this bottom part. You can keep it super simple and put the ocean straight across with the sunset on the left or on the right. Or you can do sand dunes on both sides. You can even add a little dock if you'd like, whatever you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with painting, if this is like a first time tutorial, then I would keep it simple and do the ocean straight across the back with the sunset on one side. So now that this is completely dry, I am adding some of my darker shades back in. And so for this part, you can just paint along with me. I've heard singers say before that you can, and singing coaches say that you can visualize what you want the sound to be that comes out of your mouth, and that's the sound that will come out once you get really good at visualizing it and focusing on it. I think the same is true with painting. The more you focus on something and visualize it, the more that it will just kind of flow through you and flow out of you. So like I'm creating this pathway through the sand dune. It's really just something I was kind of imagining, didn't really plan, and just played with the paint. Thank you so much for painting with me today. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you can join me on my next painting adventure.